about anybody's hammer.
Grapthars.
I don't think there are any hammers.
By Grapthar's hammer.
No, there's no hammers mentioned.
You
I
don't
mean,
know
there's
that?
an arm. They're not mentioned.
Oh, mentioned.
They're
Okay.
not mentioned.
Okay.
Somebody may have used
Just
a hammer.
because it's not mentioned doesn't mean it may not be there.
There was
Like,
that
he's
guy.
doing a lot of construction stuff at the beginning there.
Aragon's brother, what?
Roran?
Roran, he had a hammer too.
He did.
Lots of people had hammers. And then there was the dwarf.
It was really
Lord
funny.
Of the Rings. He had a hammer too. What was
no,
it?
he had an axe.
Oh, that's right. He did have an axe.
Remember, because
Remember
he's
somebody
got that
had
line.
a hammer?
And my axe.
And my axe, yeah. Thor has a hammer.
Thor does have a hammer.
But there are no hammers in this story as far as we know.
And because of Endgame, Captain America has a hammer.
Well, I mean, yeah, there's that. But okay.
No. Give me the big one.
But this isn't about hammers. It's about prayers. Prayers are more powerful than hammers. And this one particularly. We are starting 2nd Chronicles prayers today. And the first one is actually about halfway through the book in chapter 14.
Yeah.
So we're going to look at that one. And Xander's going to try to read the entire chapter again because he likes to do that. When I just put the notes there for us to study it and have the background. But he decides he wants to read it all.
So the prayer is just verse 11. So it goes,
yeah, it's only 50 words, but he's going to read 17 chapters to get us ready for it.
And Asa cried to the Lord his God, O Lord, there is none like you to help between the mighty and the weak. Help us, O Lord our God, for we rely on you, and in your name we have come against this multitude. O Lord, you are our God. Let not man prevail against you. There, we're done. See, it's been 2 minutes.
That's it.
You
Okay.
know the prayer.
We can
That's
turn it
all
off.
we need. See how boring that was? Isn't it so much better when I read the entire 3 chapters before
maybe
and
not 3
after?
chapters. But it's an interesting situation because we have here another king, another of the good kings, and
That's rare.
They are kind of a rare bird. They're not as rare as that spotted leopard that they said was extinct that somebody saw. First time in 36 years they thought they were all extinct, but apparently they're not. Which gives you hope that maybe Bigfoot is out there somewhere and they just haven't found him.
And to be fair, they haven't declared Bigfoot extinct yet, as far as I know.
That's true. They haven't declared him extinct. So as we look at this prayer, just a little bit of the background for what Asa is praying for.
Bad things were happening. There we go.
That
Moving
happens.
on.
That happens a lot, and it usually involves war. It's usually like some nation coming up against them. In this case, they had rest. They had peace for like the first 10 years that Asa was king. Things were going pretty good, and he, of course, he was taking down all the foreign altars. He broke down all the idols and stuff like that, getting people back to just worshiping God like they were supposed to, doing all the good things. And then he's even saying in chapter 7, he's like, hey, let's build these cities and put walls and towers around them. Make it really starting to build the nation up. And it's at that point then, and it says he had an army of 300,000 from Judah.
Tree.
That's a pretty good sized army just in and of itself. But then he had another 280,000 men from Benjamin, and the ones from Judah had large shields and spears, and the ones from Benjamin carried their shields and drew bows. It's hard to hold a shield while you're drawing a bow.
Yeah,
It's tough. But so he had some archers and some spearers. Is that what they're called? Spearers? I don't know. But anyway, so he had an army. That's over 500,000 people. That's a big army. It really is. But this Ethiopian king named Zerah came out against them, and he had an army of 1,000,000 people. So almost twice as big.
300 chariots.
Yeah, and the chariots. I mean, and a chariot in war against foot soldiers, a chariot with being drawn by horse, that's a powerful weapon. But he came up, and Asa goes out, and they set up their battle lines. They're ready for the war, and that's then when Asa cries out to God. And we could say that Asa, his prayer was, it was a prayer of assumption. He was assuming that God would hear. He was assuming that God would answer. He's assuming that God is going to be on their side. He assumes that the Lord is his God. I mean, he assumes those things for good reason, but they are an assumption that he makes. It's a prayer of acknowledgement. He acknowledges God. He acknowledges his power. He acknowledges that there is no other one like you to help.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a prayer of admission. He admits his need. Help us.
And that one is especially interesting because you think about, like, who was around them. He's able to come up with 580,000 soldiers just between two of the tribes of Israel.
Right? Yeah.
Just north of them are the other 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel.
Yeah,
He could have,
they
if
weren't
he
necessarily
had,
on the best of terms.
they weren't. But at the same time, if you're like, hey, there's this dude with 1 million people and some chariots,
And there were
that's coming
certainly
to
times
attack.
that they did, that
Yeah.
some of the kings, they tried to
Yeah.
get help from each other like that.
If he had asked for help, I bet they would have helped him against the 1 million people. Because
Yeah.
if they don't, their head's next on the chopping block.
Yeah, yeah.
But yet,
That's
he doesn't do that. He doesn't turn to the tribes of Israel for aid. He goes to God.
he doesn't try to get Egypt involved.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes they'd go back to Egypt and try to get Egypt involved, which seemed a little odd, but you know, that's what they would do. But he does. He admits his need for help. It's also a prayer of association. He associates God with being a God that helps the weak, to protect them from those that are stronger than them. He talks about how they rely on God. It's a prayer of acquiescence. He's giving up their own independence.
That's a fun word.
Acquiescence. Yeah, that is a nice one. It's a prayer of action. He's telling them, it's in your name we've come against this army. It's not just we want you to do it. We're ready to fight, and we're trusting you to go with us. It's a prayer of assurance. He's assuring the people with his prayer to God, as well as being assured himself that God is listening and that God will answer him. It's a prayer of alliance. He wants to be an ally with God. Again, you are our God, not their God. You're our God, and so he wants that ally. And a prayer of anticipation. Let no man prevail against you. He anticipates that God is going to stand up for himself as much as he is for Israel.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a common theme.
Yeah, that's
with
used a
It's
lot in the Old Testament, where
Yeah.
it's like, God, are you going to let them do this against you? Like,
it's going to make you look bad if we're your people and we lose.
Yeah.
That would make you look bad. So you come out and stand up for yourself.
It's funny. It's kind of an odd thought. I don't think we would really consider it nowadays. But
Not really. It's true.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's the same in that, you know, we look at the things that when people see churches and what makes them badmouth certain churches, a lot of times it's because, a lot of times it's because those churches aren't standing with God.
Yeah.
They haven't made the alliance. They haven't made that association with God strongly enough themselves. But and then people mock them and annihilate them even.
But the other funny thing is that things have changed a little bit. Like, as Christians, yes, we're God's chosen people. But you think about the first century. The Christians were losing. They were being gathered up and thrown into prison and sent to the Colosseum and murdered in terrible ways. they they were being destroyed by all accounts. At one point, one of the Roman emperors commissioned a empty coffin to be crafted because he said that he had put Jesus Christ and Christianity inside it, basically saying that he had ended them.
It exterminated them.
So, to all perspectives, God was abandoning his people yet again and letting them lose. He was just providing shame for himself. But that's just because they don't understand how it works now.
Yeah. Because the Christians weren't fighting back and didn't have an army that was attacking Rome back when Rome or when the Jewish leaders tried to fight against them. They didn't fight back. So, yeah, that definitely makes a difference.
Yeah, that's not the point now.
So, what did God do? He just like, oh no, y'all are on your own. No. He did answer Asa's prayer, and he answered it. His performance was beyond anything Asa expected, I imagine. We talk about sometimes how God is able to do abundantly above all we ask or even imagine.
Yep.
And yet sometimes our prayers are so small. And Asa, in fact, he's asking, hey, fight with us, don't let them overcome us. But I don't think he had any way of anticipating what God was going to do next. God's performance was so far above his expectations. It was a performance of abundance. I mean, he didn't just defeat them. He
whooped them.
It was so far above. It says in the following verses after the prayer in verse 12, it says, so the Lord defeated the Ethiopians before Asa and before Judah, and the Ethiopians fled. So this wasn't even a close battle. It's just like, you've got an army half the size of the other guy's army, and you come out there, and before long, they're running away from you. That's abundance. And then it was a performance of annihilation. I mean, it wasn't just we beat them, they started running, and we let them run off. They chased them down. They pursued them, and the Ethiopians fell until none remained alive.
And you think about how crazy that is, that a group of guys... Sorry.
And I think sometimes sometimes phrases like none remained alive is like a hyperbole. It doesn't mean there's not like one single soldier here or there that escaped and hid in the bushes, but there was no army left.
Yeah.
There might have been a guy here or there that ran off and hid in the bushes or something, and maybe. But
I mean,
but there's nobody left.
If you read the context and like all the plundering they do afterwards,
they definitely
were pretty thorough. But it's amazing to me that you have an army of 1 million guys, 300 chariots. The other army coming up against them has no chariots, and almost 600,000 guys. So a little over half that number. And still, they're able to just wipe them out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, all it takes is each guy killing a couple other guys on the other side, and that's so, But yeah, that's a massive battle, though. I mean, you think about 1.5 million people in a battle. There's some, supposed scholars will say, well, that can't be. They couldn't have possibly had an army that size in that day and age, and blah blah blah. And they've found historical records going back that indicate yes, actually, they did have armies that size. I think sometimes historians think it's just like a little town, a little village of 50 people with, 10 men going out to battle against another village of 50 people with 10 men. That's not the way it was. These were nations fighting each other. In today's world, I mean, an army of 1 million would be a really small army.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah, when nations start going to war nowadays, I don't even want to think
I'm trying to
about
think-
what numbers would be
I
involved.
think I heard like China has like 100 million, an army of like 100 million.
That makes sense.
That's a lot. That's a lot of people. That's like
It is.
that's like I mean we only have like 300 million people in our whole country,
Yeah.
but they have 100 million in their army.
Yeah.
That's a big army, but it was obviously a performance of absoluteness and his he goes. I mean, the spoil they took, in addition to winning the battle, then they got to spoil the enemy. It was a performance of additional feats that God performed beyond anything that they imagined. They weren't expecting. I mean, the plunder they carried away, it talks about, is very much spoil, and it was also his performance was one that caused apprehension in the neighboring peoples. Even when they chased the Ethiopians to Gerar, they attacked all the cities around Gerar, and all the people there were scared, and they plundered all those cities. And there was a lot of plunder. It was just.
Can you
they
imagine?
adapted too. There was the adaptation.
Can you imagine like over 500,000 people just going on a rampage,
Storming into one town after another.
They're just running around the countryside, just slaughtering everybody.
Well, and this
pillaging.
wasn't something, you think about. I mean, I don't know how far all these villages were and cities were from each other, but if you just think about from here, for an army to march, I mean, we're so spoiled because we hop in our cars, and even from over here in Mineral Bluff, we can be down to Ellijay in 30 minutes. We can be to Blue Ridge in 15. It takes us 5 minutes to get to McKaysville. We can be all the way over to Blairsville in less than 30 minutes. But if an army was marching and doing that, I mean, it's going to take a while to march, 8 or 10 miles or 20 miles. It's going to take a long time for them to march all of that.
Oh yeah.
And so this battle that we read about here, God it wasn't just like, well, I'll help you today.
Yeah.
This was a long term. How long they pursued them, and how long they were killing, and then how long they're attacking these other cities. This could have lasted for months.
You think about it. A lot of us are just like, oh yeah, well, there's a distance, and yeah, I get that it's walking, and I could walk from point A to point B, and maybe a day if it's a long walk. But that's not the same case for an army. Because you think about it, an army isn't just one person walking from point A to point B. You got a whole long line of people. Think about it as a line at the grocery store or in a drive-thru. Once that first person starts moving forward, the people in the back can't start moving until the next person moves, and 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 the next person moves, until it gets back to them, and then they can start going. So if you've got a group of 500,000 people, and that line is 10,000 people long, then if the people in the front start moving, it may be 30 minutes or something before the people in the back even get to take a single step, much less actually reach their destination. And just like with a traffic jam, if the people in the front have to put on stop for a second, that ripples all the way back down. And then they have to start moving again, and that ripples all the way back down. And it's 30 minutes before the people in the back can start going again.
So if these towns were the same place they were,
Yeah.
I mean, this is today from Marishah, which is where the battle started, to Gerar, is, I mean, it's about 45 miles. They've got 54.8 kilometers. That's about 42 to 45 miles, somewhere in that neighborhood. So I mean, that's a long way to march, and they're chasing people and fighting along the way, and because every day, when they come, I mean, obviously, even if the people are running from them, they're still going to turn around and fight when they get attacked, to try to defend themselves. And then after they chase that down, then they're still attacking the other cities around there. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, this battle easily could have taken weeks or even months. And that's the way a lot of the battles, in the olden days, the kings would go out to war, and they'd go out to war for half the year and then come back home. It wasn't just a one day thing. It was, and just like we sometimes, even though we know soldiers would go on a tour for a year, 18 months, 2-year tours. They do all these different sign up for however long. We don't often, a lot those that aren't in a military family don't necessarily think about that. But in this case, I mean, if there are 600,000, that's most of the men of Judah and Benjamin. Mm-hmm. That's most of the men are gone, and they're gone for these long periods of time. It's only God's protection that keeps them from being attacked. Yeah, it's not like today in the United States we send off our soldiers off to a war. It doesn't leave us undefended. We still have the National Guard, and we still have people around every corner that have 57 rifles in their basement. It's like, and maybe not in New York City, they, but where we live, there's a lot of that, but we're not completely under. It's not just the 80-year-old men who are still at home or the little children. There are still healthy, capable men all around. It's almost like we don't.
And if we get bombed, none of them are gonna do us any good.
No, if we get bombed, that's a totally different thing. But if somebody sends some armies,
just changed slightly.
Warfare is definitely
over the past
different.
1,000 years. And it's
But you just look at it, they plundered all these cities. There was so much plunder. It talks about how much plunder they got, and they just kept collecting it for days. And they carried away all the sheep and the camels and everything, and then they went back and returned to Jerusalem. And then they rejoiced because that God had answered the prayer. And it doesn't say on this one. On some of it's interesting to see. There are some of the battles that Israel fought like this, but there are some of those battles where it comes back. They come back and they find not even one of them got killed. I mean, you think about how incredible that is to have an entire battle, an entire war. Even when you win the war, even when you defeat the enemies, some of your guys still get killed. So for there to be, and it doesn't say in this one, it doesn't really talk about that side of it, but certainly in some of those cases that was something that God did often too. But God did some amazing things, and just because Asa asked, just because the king goes to him in prayer and isn't afraid to say, hey, you're our God, we need your help. Don't let us be ashamed. Don't let your name be ashamed. Don't let anyone prevail against you. Help us as the weaker of these two armies. Help us against this stronger one. And I think that's so important for us as Christians today in a world where we look around us and we're outnumbered by Satan's forces. Sometimes it's 2-1, sometimes it's even more than that. Sometimes it seems like there's 10 of them for every one of us, or 100 of them for every one of us. And we can feel overwhelmed. And we have choices to make. Do we give up? Do we just tuck tail and run? Do we hide? Do we just pretend we're not really Christians? Or do we go to God in prayer and ask Him to be there and to do stuff for us on our side? Do we proclaim him to be our God? Sometimes in our culture, in our modern world, we've gotten to the point where we've kind of accepted materialism, but not materialism in the sense of like lust for money, not that kind of materialism. But we've accepted materialism in the sense philosophically as that there's no spiritual realm that gets involved in our physical realm. We've just accepted almost a level of deism where we don't really believe that God is active in our world. And we got to change that.
Part of the reason for that is somewhat well-deserved, because there have been some spiritual movements in America, such as the Pentecostal movement, that overemphasize the spiritual and what the spiritual can do in this world. And because of that, as conservative, upright Christians, we've kind of shied away from that end of the spectrum entirely and just said, well, nope, all of it's just no.
And
that's not a thing anymore.
We've kind of overreacted too far the other way.
Mm-hmm.
Because we know that those miraculous gifts that they had in the first century ceased.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that God stopped working. It just means he's not still working in the same way he did then.
Yeah.
He's still here.
I mean,
and he's still ready to act on our behalf if we will come to him in faith and ask him.
If God really stopped working nowadays, there would be no point in becoming a Christian.
Yeah.
Because it is his power that cleanses us from sin and offers us eternal life. So if he has stopped working nowadays, you might as well just give this whole thing up.
Yeah, but so many times we relegate him to, well, yeah, he helps us with our sin and stuff in the spiritual world over here, but down here on the regular earth, we got to fend for ourselves. And it's time for us to start trusting him again.
Mm-hmm.
It's time for us to really...
past time.
well, I mean, we can't go back in time and start, so we need to start now. Trust him. Let him be God, and let him do, as Paul said, in Ephesians, let him do abundantly above all we ask or imagine. Mm-hmm. Let him do it.
And not only that, but Greek teacher at Freed Hardeman, Ralph Gilmore.
Not the Gilmore Girls.
No,
different.
I was listening to a lesson by Ralph Gilmore at one point, and he was talking about God things, where you're just living your life, and something just kind of unordinary happens, but it's just small, it's a random thing. So you just keep on going, and you look back on it 10 years later, and you're like, huh, that wasn't normal.
Yeah,
there was something odd going on there. And whether it seems like it's good or bad, those are sometimes God things.
Yeah, sometimes God throws some little things into our lives to get our attention, to remind us that he's there. And sometimes we don't pay attention.
Yeah.
Sometimes we do.
And so, aside from just praying for God to do things for you, pay attention to what he's doing that you're not asking him for. Because God does a lot, and as oblivious humans, we don't really realize it all that much. I love one of the examples he gave was, I'm probably going to butcher this terribly.
Probably.
But it was along the lines of his wife had been diagnosed with cancer, and he was...
And depending on how badly butchered this is, Ralph might be surprised to find out that his wife had been diagnosed with cancer.
No,
that's not
I'm
pretty sure about that part?
I'm pretty sure about that part.
Okay.
His wife had been diagnosed with... I just don't remember how the rest of it lined up.
Wow.
His wife had been diagnosed with cancer, and he had to speak that Sunday. And he was still, struggling with things, having a hard time. But right before he gets up to speak, as he's mulling things over, he realizes that the song that the song leader was singing was like his wife's favorite song. And he hadn't been asked to do that. It was just the song leader just randomly chose that song that Sunday for that time right before Ralph was going to get up and speak. And Ralph was sitting there and he was just like, he just kind of felt calm and knew everything was going to be okay. And those are God things. Things that are just totally random, that don't seem to make sense, but if we notice them, they are so important.
Yeah. Well, and I think about that in my own life too. My wife and I was from Colorado. She was from Nebraska.
Mm-hmm.
And how both of us wound up at a school that until our senior year in high school, we'd never even heard of it.
Yeah.
We wound up in a college down in Montgomery, Alabama together at the same time. And I mean, how that that wasn't something we planned. But it's, yeah, and the fact that when we got there and once we got to know each other and we found out that we had met before when we were like not even quite teenagers yet, like 11, 12, 13, maybe barely teenage age.
Yeah.
And we had met before. Wait, what? How did that? When? How? And no way that we planned all that kind of thing out.
Mm-hmm. But yeah.
But we got together.
Just like with Asa and so many other amazing things in the Old Testament and the New Testament as well, God does things for us. If we ask, but sometimes even if we don't ask, just if we're faithful to Him. Now, don't go expecting that, oh, I'm faithful to God, so I'm going to be winning the lottery, getting $1 million just because, God is good all the time and He does stuff like that. Not what we're going for.
Yeah.
But keep an eye out. Keep a prayer up. Pay attention. And see what God might be doing for you.
I think I saw somewhere, somebody said it's not that God never lets bad things happen to you, but He's there with you through the bad things. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing that we have to keep in mind is that He's there.
Some of the most powerful God things that I've ever noticed was when I was going through a rough time and I just took a step back and was like, what's God doing here? I know he's got to be involved. What's he working on? And the way that opens things up and shows you a different perspective on things, really, I saw a lot.
To help you look at what lesson am I supposed to learn from what I'm going through here?
Yeah.
Because God is all about us learning and growing from the experiences that we have in life.
Yep.
So, what can I learn from whatever the circumstance that I'm going through is? He wants us to learn a lesson and grow from it and get closer to Him as a result of it. All right. Well, this is our Wednesday night study. Don't know how much longer we'll be doing these. Probably a couple more weeks. Next week I don't know. We may have to film one ahead of time. We have to film another one tonight for next week, just true. So we have, because we're going to be gone out of town on Wednesday next week. So we'll have to film another one for you.
We're going to be gone Sunday night as well.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to do that one Saturday.
We'll get it figured out. That's an us problem.
We'll get
not
it.
A you
we'll
problem.
Get it to you. We'll figure out a way. Anyway, good to see you today, or at least good to let you see us. And
Maybe.
We hope that Asa's prayer and his acceptance of God's being there for him, that he could approach God so assuredly that God's going to listen and He's going to perform something great, and the great thing about this one to me, in some ways more so even than some of the others we've got. We saw the one where that Hezekiah prayed and God sent the angel out and killed everybody. That's not what happened here. God didn't just miraculously send an angel to strike everybody dead.
As far as we know.
Well, I mean, it says they fought the battle.
But at
They
the same
chased it. I
time,
mean, but
it
they were involved.
it does say, so the Lord defeated the
Right.
Ethiopians.
Well, it's always the Lord doing it,
Hmm.
but He expects us to do our part. He do our
Yeah.
role. But it wasn't just they went out and found the million people were all dead. They had to go out there to battle. They had to actually go, and that's a little different. And that's something for us now when we're not expecting God to just miraculously strike all the enemies dead. But we do know that even if it's not as clear miraculous type thing like the case of Hezekiah, God is still able to perform what we might call providentially through a combination of our faith and our efforts and then His help that He gives us to accomplish these things. And He takes the credit, of course, and He deserves the credit because we couldn't have done it on our own. But that's always good to know that not every story from the Bible that involves a prayer like this involved some big miraculous thing that we can't expect to happen. And this is an example of that. It's not complete. This is a little different than the story of Gideon, where 300 men defeat an army of hundreds of thousands. This is actually, they were outnumbered. It didn't look good. The other team had the other army had the chariots. Team, I don't know, the other army, the other side had they had these, and they were needing help from God, but it was something that was not necessarily hugely obviously miraculously done. And that's an important one for us because we kind of live in a situation where we don't expect the big miraculous things like they had in the first century to happen. So anyway, sorry that I just had to throw that in at the end. Anyway,
Tangent.
that was not a tangent. That was a coherent thought.
Who says tangents can't be coherent? My goodness. You've been listening to me too long. I think all tangents are just rambling nonsense.
Most of yours are. You go off
That's
on.
why I said you think you've been listening to me too long.
All right. Well, we'll see you next time. Hope you've enjoyed this. Hope you've learned something that you can put to practice in your prayer life.
Yep.